Hey, what's up guys? Beside me is Marin's latest version of the Alpine Trail, their hard-hitting enduro bike. Stay tuned to learn all about it and find out how it's performed in this review on thelonewolf.com. Let's go. In 2024, Marin updated the Alpine Trail, giving it more travel, more aggressive angles, and more adjustability to make it a harder hitting machine than ever. That has included the update to a new Multi-Track 2 LT suspension system, a bump up to 160 millimeters of travel, mullet compatibility as standard, but the option to switch that to a 29er if you prefer, and adjustability in both the head tube angle and with a Horselink mounted flip chip, giving you different chainstay and bottom bracket height options. The Alpine Trail frame is built with Marin's Series 4 alloy. It's one of their higher grades of aluminium, using multiple butted tube-ins and complex forgings to keep the weight down where it's not required and to add stiffness and strength where it's needed. This features all of the premium kind of features that you'd expect from a high-quality Marin frame, such as full internal cable routing, including ports that are designed to keep the weather out as best as possible and keep rattling to a minimum. There's protection to the down tube on the lower pivot to keep crud out of that lower pivot area, and generous seat stay and chainstay protection to try and keep noise to a minimum. Up at the head tube, Marin's used a custom angle adjustable headset system. This uses a keyed system for the upper cup and then a kind of bushing on the lower cup, letting you choose between a neutral or a plus or minus 0.75 degree angle adjustment. On the seat stay, you get the adjustment between the 29 or 27.5 inch rear wheels, which corrects both the geometry and the kinematics when you change that, meaning that you should get the same kind of handling between the two bikes, aside from that wheel size. And then down at the chainstay, like I mentioned, you've got a flip chip that lets you choose between a high and short rear end or low and long rear end, letting you really tailor the handling to your preferences. Also new to the Alpine Trail is their bare box storage system. So on the down tube, you've got a quick release latch letting you access into the cavity in the down tube and store the essentials in there. And in that, you get a nylon bag, which is given a weather sealed zipper, meaning that you can keep the kind of water and potential mud off of whatever you store inside there, just in case. On the top of the bare box storage hatch, there's a water bottle boss with plenty of room inside the front triangle to get a nice and big water bottle. And then on the underside of the top tube, there's a secondary tool mount letting you carry a tool with you easily on a ride. As I mentioned earlier, on the new Alpine Trail, Marin's moved to a different suspension system. It's now a Horselink setup. They're calling the Multi-Track 2 LT. And basically they had to move to this system in order to get the kinematics that they wanted out of the now 160 mil travel on the Alpine Trail's rear end. So for that, you've got progression that sits around about 27%, quite low anti-squat and anti-rise figures, meaning that the rear end moves nice and freely, but isn't necessarily the most efficient out there. In terms of the geometry, and there's a huge amount of adjustment on offer on the Alpine Trail between that headset cup, the different wheel size options, and the Horselink flip chip. Marin's not given this particularly size-specific geometry, so it is the same 63.5 degree nominal head tube angle and either 435 or 442 millimeter rear end, depending on the flip chip setting that you have. But of course, there's a lot of different adjustability, so you're best to head to the Marin website to see all of the different figures. But you've got a 490 millimeter reach or so as a nominal setting on the size large, about a 643 millimeter stack height, and then a 78.8 degree effective seat tube angle, so fairly steep for this size large. Marin's offering a choice of 3 different build specs in the Alpine Trail, from the one here at $3,200 all the way up to the XR Axis at about $5,400. And they also offer a frame and shock option with the RockShox Super Deluxe Coil Ultimate Shock at $1,850 if you're wanting to build it up from the frame. This build spec, the Alpine Trail 1 that we tested, is certainly the entry-level build with that more entry-level price point. But Marin's been quite smart in where they've put the money, and for the most part, the spec on this is really ready to just hop on and absolutely rip. The one concession to that is the Fox Float Performance rear shock, which does have a custom tune and probably would suit riders in the sort of 70 to 80 kilo range on the size large fairly well. But I'd still be keen, if I were you, to at least think about upgrading or changing to a coil sprung rear end, because as we'll talk about in a little bit, it made a notable difference and improvement to the overall handling and capability of the Alpine Trail. But as standard, you've got a Fox 38 Performance fork with the grip damper, the Fox Float Performance rear shock, as I mentioned. You've got TRP Slate Evo brakes on 203mm rotors on both ends, which have actually been a real standout product for this bike. You've got Shimano Deore 12-speed drivetrain with an FSA heavy-duty crankset on there. And then Marin double wall alloy rims laced to Shimano TC500 hubs with center-lock rotors. Rounding out the specs are Marin cockpit and saddle, and then a Trans-X dropper post, which are typically in fairly long lengths. Apart from this size large, has a 170mm dropper, which is something that we'd love to see increased to 200 for the future specs. As standard, the wheels are wrapped in a V Snap WCE tyre combo with 2.6-inch width, and they did roll quite slowly and just weren't quite the most inspiring tyres we've tested, so we swapped them out for a Maxxis Assegai Exo Plus Max Terra up front and a Continental Crip Total in the rear after some issues with the V tyres. Overall, certainly not a lightweight build. As you see, it's about 38.3 pounds. Once we'd coil shocked it and added some burlier tyres, it got more up towards the 40-pound range. But as we'll talk about in a little bit, that doesn't mean everything out on the trail, and the result has certainly been a fairly solid performer. So let's get on to the ride impressions. My testing period on Marin's Alpine Trail 1 started at the tail end of summer, where trail conditions were running super fast, and the trails that I was riding were actually just a little bit more on the aggressive and high speed side of things. And then as winter slowly set in, things progressed. I came back to my local trails and everything slowed down a little bit. And as such, the adjustability that's built into the Marin Alpine Trail really came in handy, and I was able to really tailor the character of the bike to each of the different riding situations. I think what Marin has done with the adjustability on this bike is really quite impressive, and you can absolutely transform the character from a fairly playful, fairly agile overall rig all the way to something super slacked out and low slung that's really built for a super high speed terrain. Getting the rear end set up with that Fox Float Performance shock was very difficult. I'm 220 pounds or 100 kilograms, and as such, I do typically fall slightly outside of the tuning range for shocks. So you'll find that a lot of the time I'm quite high up in the compression range of a rear shock with a compression adjustment. But what that means is when you've got a shock without any compression adjustment, such as this Fox Float Performance shock, you're totally relying on the factory set compression settings. And I think in this case, Marin's gone for a slightly lighter tune than would be ideal for me. I mean, I've had to overspring it in order to get the kind of support that I would want. And it really just means that I'm constantly running into a wall of progression, and it's also a little bit harsh off the top as well with this shock. Thankfully though, I was able to get a Fox DHX2 coil shock onto the rear end of this, had the right spring, sat around 450 pounds for my body weight, which put me at about 30% sag, and instantly the character of this bike absolutely transformed for the better on the way down the hill, and it became an absolute riot to descend on. I think Marin's call to spec that Fox Float Performance shock on this Trail 1 build is yeah, it's not what I would have liked to see. I know that they also spec Marzocchi on other builds in their different ranges, and I think something like the Bomber CR shock would have suited this bike a lot better for that price point. But yeah, maybe if you are looking to buy this Alpine Trail 1 build, certainly try it with the Fox Float Performance. You might be very happy with it, but I would certainly be budgeting a little bit extra to swap out that shock for a coil shock to really unlock the descending performance of this bike. Before you get to the descent, so sadly you do have to pedal up the hill most of the time unless you've got an uplift service locally. And the Alpine Trail is 38.3 pounds in the stock spec. Things did climb to about the 40-pound range once I'd fitted that coil shock and a slightly burlier tyre. So certainly not a lightweight build. In fact, certainly on the heavier side of the spectrum. And of course that does mean that for in particular technical climbing, when you're accelerating a lot, you do feel a little bit sluggish. There's also not a huge amount of support in the pedaling character of that rear end on the Horselink system that Marin's gone for. So yeah, certainly you'll be wanting to primarily climb up access roads, fire roads, preferably with a shock with a lockout lever on it as well, just to obtain a little bit more efficiency. That said, plenty of grip, a really nice seating position with quite a steep seat tube angle on this bike. So it's not terrible if you're not in a rush to get up a technical climb, but it definitely does feel a little bit more cumbersome than some. However, yeah, absolutely. If you're able just to spin your legs on a fairly mellow climb, it'll definitely get you up there, and then you'll be ready to drop into the descent, which is really where the Alpine Trail comes alive. The character of this bike, like I mentioned earlier, you can really adjust it from, it's about a 64-degree head tube angle, a short rear end, a fairly high BB in the steepest and highest settings, all the way to a sub 63-degree head tube angle, really nice and low slung and planted and spread out bike. And with that adjustability, it really pays to be adjusting this bike to the terrain ahead, because it can really transform its character. You can take it from a really playful rig that's really nicely suited to a bike park, especially if you go slack head tube angle, high BB and short chainstay with a 27.5-inch wheel. And then by adapting it to a 29er in the rear, going for the lower, slacker, or even a steeper head tube, but lower BB setting with a longer rear end, you can really rein it in and make it just a more balanced and easier bike to ride fast. And I really like the possibilities that offers you. In, say, a neutral setting overall, it is still definitely more of a plow-friendly, heavier weight, more planted feeling beast, especially with the coil-sprung rear end. With the air-sprung rear end, it does feel slightly more, well-rounded, we'll say, with slightly more efficient feeling, but it does really rob you of quite a lot of sensitivity off the top, at least for my body weight with this rear shock. So, yeah, like I said, I'd definitely vouch for swapping out to a coil shock, because it did really improve the descending performance of this bike. Otherwise, it's certainly the frame stiffness is in a nice spot. It's not overly stiff, but it is certainly fairly stiff for an alloy bike, as you'd probably expect looking at how it's constructed. It is nice and burly, especially around all the pivots. These are some of the burlier, thicker flip chips that I've seen, and it's really nice to know that you're not going to have any issues with those in the longer term. All the frame hardware is super burly and just built to stand up to the test of time, which is really cool, especially if you're like a privateer racer or something wanting to take this bike and just ride it and abuse it for season after season. Is probably going to serve you really well. All of the details have been really well covered by Marin on this, I'd say. They've really paid attention to making the frame pivots nicely sealed. They've paid attention to cable routing. It ran really quietly. The only couple of things that I would say are the chainstay protection isn't totally perfect. You can still get some rattle and some paint chipping closer to the chainring on that chainstay. You've also not got a chain guide as standard spec on this bike, which is an omission and did lead to a few drop chains over the course of testing. And yeah, there's a few spec calls here and there that aren't incredible. That rear shock, the standard tire spec weren't fantastic, but certainly for just over $3,000, this is a fairly well put together machine, and certainly the overall frame quality really makes you think that you'd be able to take this Trail 1 spec and adapt it and kind of customize it and improve it over time, and you're going to be left with a solid frame from which to upgrade around. Absolute spec highlights for me were the TRP Slate Evo brakes. They feel really good. They're kind of another TRP brake that I don't think gets really their praises sung enough. TRP brakes are absolutely some of the best that aren't given the praise that they deserve, and the Slate Evos are a great call, offering plenty of power and nice control on this Alpine Trail 1. The Shimano Deore drivetrain was flawless, apart from the drop chains, but it's not Shimano chainring on there, and on a hard-hitting enduro bike without a chain guide, it's not that much of a surprise. And apart from the dropper spec, which is on the slightly short side, I would say, for a size large enduro bike with plenty of insertion depth, it'd be nice to see a 200mm instead of the 170 spec. But for the shorter legged riders, this is a solid dropper post, and it's proved to perform without any issues. Overall, the Alpine Trail 1 has been a very enjoyable bike to test, and its adaptability and just general handling package that Marin's put together is really impressive. So it's definitely not a bike that I would rule out if you're in the market for a harder hitting enduro bike. Hope you guys have enjoyed checking out this video on the Marin Alpine Trail 1. Give us a like if you've enjoyed it. Leave us a comment, let us know your thoughts. Is this bike too heavy for an enduro bike, or are you appreciative, as I am, of its burly nature and no-nonsense construction? Let us know, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more awesome content on awesome bikes like the Marin Alpine Trail 1. Also, please do consider subscribing to our members only page. We're giving away product for you to test for us, meaning you get to keep it for free. We're giving guest spots on shootouts and trips and many awesome discount codes and everything, as well as trying to build a community that you could be a part of. So please do consider hitting the link in the description and checking that out in case you want to become a member. And for now, thank you very much for watching. Hope to catch you out on the trails.